Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Lab podcast. I'm Dina Phillips, your host, and I'm back again with leadership expert Jesse McCullough. Jess, how are you doing today?
I am hanging in there, my friend. It's good to be back. This is a little different territory. Sean was with us last time, and he's out on assignment this time. But I think we're going to give it a good go today, my friend. I'm looking forward to the
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah, we'll see if we can get along without him for a day, and I'd be glad to have him back, but we'll see what we can do today. Well, in today's episode, we wanted to talk a little bit about the law of cause and effect and how we can see that playing out in our daily lives and our daily practices. And so, why don't you introduce our listeners to this concept?
Yeah, last time when we got together, we were talking about this idea of knowing the law or obeying the law, and laws govern pretty much everything around us, right? There's all sorts of different laws that come in, and once you start to look for them, you'll see them. You'll see them at work all over the place. Um, Whenever I started down this path of improving my leadership, one of the things that I encountered very early on was something called the law of cause and effect. If you're familiar with, if you're at least aware of Ralph Waldo Emerson, he called this the law of all laws, right? The law of cause and effect, and it's because this is a law that is at work all the time. And it's a very simple law. It says that for every cause there is an effect, and for every effect there is a cause. And sometimes it's more complex than that. Sometimes there's multiple causes that come together and that will deliver an effect. And sometimes there's effect that have all sorts of factors that contribute to it. But what we want to do is we want to look for the opportunities to be able to identify and to describe what are those causes that will deliver the effects, and especially the effects that we want, right? Um, the example that I use for this, it's a very simplistic example, but I think it helps to illustrate the idea is that if you wanted to bake a cake, what would you do? You would get some flour and some milk and some butter and some eggs and you'd mix that in a bowl and you put it in a pan and you put it in your oven, and after some amount of time there's at least a chance that a cake is going to come out. But if you were to take that same pan and if you were to put in an old tennis shoe and some bubble gum and some dental floss, and I'm looking here on my desk, I have a Rubik's cube on my desk, right? If you were to throw a Rubik's cube into that, you could mix it up all you want. You could put it in the oven and you could leave it in there as long as you wanted. But what's the result? Are you ever going to have a cake come out? And I think the answer is no. So understanding that this is a law that is always at work is such an important, and it's also such an empowering thing for us to recognize as we move forward.
Yeah, yes. And sometimes, even when I put all those ingredients together, my lack of experience, I never get a cake, or at least not
That's
a cake that anyone would want to be a part of.
I can
So
appreciate that. I don't go down that road very often myself, but the general concept remains, right? That
it does.
if we have the right causes, if we have the right ingredients, we put ourselves in a position to get the right results.
It's at least possible when
Yes.
things going well. So, how have you seen this law working against us or being detrimental to, strive, detrimental to us striving for things that we would want to do or be, or, yeah.
Whenever I started to learn this law, what stuck out to me was how often people, and especially in the pharmacy world, how often we live on the effect side of the law of cause and effect, right? There's we just live in such a reactionary or reactive type environment. My background is in community pharmacy. I'd welcome your perspectives here as well. But the in the community pharmacy, you're always reacting to many things, right? You're waiting for the phone to ring. You're waiting for a patient to come in. There's any number of things that could happen, which can completely shift the way that your day goes. Uh, when I was In my early days of practice, I would go in to the pharmacy in the morning, and the first thing I would do is I would dump the queue, right? There were prescriptions that would come in overnight, and I would get there in the morning, and I'd have whatever number of prescriptions. The first thing that I would do is I would just run them all. And I would have baskets and they'd be stacked to the ceiling. And then what would happen is like that put me in a more reactionary state. I now felt like I had all of this work piled up for me. And then if the phone rang or if somebody came in, then I was a little more on edge. I was a little more agitated than probably what I needed to be. One of the first projects I was given in the pharmacy, and this goes back to even my days as an intern, I was told, Jess, you need to be in charge of the inventory. And I thought maybe there was somebody else in the pharmacy that was named Jess that day, right? I was looking behind me, trying to figure out, who my boss was talking to. But when it comes down to it, how you manage your inventory, that's a cause. If you manage your inventory well, then what's the result? You're not going to have out of stock, so you're going to have product on hand at the appropriate time. If you don't give that a lot of attention, what's going to happen? You're going to have all sorts of things you don't want, and you're going to have things that and you're not going to have things that you do want at inappropriate times, right? So it's an important thing for us to for us to recommend, or for us to recognize that we need to operate on the causative side of cause and effect. I will tell you that because of how we're essentially trained or conditioned, that can be difficult. That can be absolutely difficult. I was living in that reactionary space for all that time, and I remember that they announced, "Hey, we want to implement an automatic refill system." And there were so many of my colleagues that fought against that. People don't want to do this. They'll never this, they want to be able to call in their prescriptions whenever, they want to be able to come in. They don't want to come in and just have this stuff be ready. There were all these things. But that shift, that implementing some type of service that would automate the refill of prescriptions was a step towards allowing pharmacists to be more causative in the workplace. Now, some of my colleagues went kicking and screaming, but because we did that, now we had ourselves positioned in a much better way that we weren't going to be out of stock on products, and we would be able to provide a better experience, and all those different things that came into it. In 2010, I believe I was at the APHA annual meeting in Washington, D.C., and I was introduced to this idea of the appointment-based model. And the appointment-based model was all built around this idea of synchronizing refills. And that was something that absolutely captured my imagination. Like, oh my goodness, we could do this, and these are the things that could happen. That was another step towards being causative and living on the cause end of the law of cause and effect. Now, I didn't realize it. I didn't have the language at the time because, going back to what we talked about last week, I didn't know the law. And because I didn't know the law, I wasn't sure how to obey the law, and I was also not real sure on how to promote, that idea within the workplace. Because I will tell you that I spent months and months promoting this idea that we should do refill synchronization, or we should at least try it, right? Maybe it's not the right thing, but let's at least try it. Maybe this is a solution that can help us. And it took a long time before we ultimately were able to get a good pilot of that particular service. In the world today, we have many pharmacies that are so frustrated. They're frustrated with different fees and clawbacks, and they're frustrated with terms and conditions, and rightfully so, that come from them from different third party payers, different PBMs, right? Whenever those fees were applied retroactively, you're completely blind. You are absolutely living in the effect side of the law of cause and effect, right? And we need to recognize that if we can find the right causes to put into that, we can then expect better results. right? And so in the world today, or in the country today, there's a lot of talk of PBM reform. Like if you go on LinkedIn and do a little bit of scrolling now, and my intent whenever we do these podcasts, Dina, is that they be more evergreen, and maybe this makes it a little less evergreen. Maybe there's a day that this won't be a topic. I'm a little suspicious that will always be debating some of these things. But if you, it doesn't take too much effort to find, there's payment reform. How do we improve that? Well, what is that all a call for? It's that we want payment reform because we want a different effect. Right. And the idea is if we can have a different cause, if we can have different rules, if we can have different regulations, if we can, whatever those parameters may turn out to be, then hopefully that's going to lead to a different effect. That will be the new cause that will lead to a new effect.
Yes. No, I agree. I was just sitting here thinking too, for some of our listeners and our pharmacy colleagues who maybe more find themselves in a middle management situation
Mhm.
like I am in.
Yeah.
I don't hold the purse strings, but I also have a team to lead and a department to run and a vision to try to capture, and managing people and all the things. And you have a lot of bosses above you and some below you, and so I'm very middle of the road. And so one of the things that I found encouraging when trying to implement this and thinking of examples in my own practice was that it doesn't have to be the groundbreaking,
No.
new super duper big thing either. I just like 2 weeks ago, I was speaking to one of our patients on the phone regarding her warfarin therapy, and she was having some trouble, with getting her INRs. And if there's one place where I think we can all agree that we feel very reactive, it's warfarin therapy, with
Oh,
having to react to the INR when it comes
you're,
in,
you're, what an excellent example. Like the world that you live in, the anti-coag world, you're always trying to deduce what's the cause, what's the effect. Right?
Right.
You've had times where you've had a patient come in, the INR is whatever, 2.5, 2.7, and it's in a therapeutic range, right? And you say, keep doing what you're doing. They come back in next time, the INR's 6. I'm making that up, of course, but you say, what have you done different? They say, I haven't done anything different, right? And it's you're always trying to you live in the world of cause and effect.
I do, and it feels very reactive, and sometimes it feels like leaves you very frustrated and very not powerless. That's not the right word, but just like you don't really see a different path forward because you have to react to the INR. It's like I'm just stuck in my job reacting, and I
Mhm.
can't really live in a causative thing. And as I sat down and started talking to her, she was like, gosh, I just forget to take it in the evenings. And we talked about moving it to the mornings and all that kind of stuff. But the one thing that was very causative in that situation for her was I showed her how to set a reminder on her phone. Like that's literally all she needed. She's like 75 years old. She has an iPhone that was like 10 versions ago from her grandson,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I pull it out and we show her how to set an alarm on her phone to take her meds in the evenings. And that was groundbreaking for her. Maybe it's not changing the practice of pharmacy as we speak, but for that patient, it was monumental. And then she also got to feel like she's putting in better causes to get better effects
Absolutely.
out. And so that was just
When
one example that stuck out to me.
Yeah, whenever I became aware of many of these things, right? Know the law, obey the law, cause and effect. It's like, okay, where do you start? It's a valid question, and it doesn't have to be difficult, right? Counsel that I give people is that, hey, you don't need to go from 0 to 1,000. It's like if you can't figure out a next step that you can do right now, like that's where you want. You want to be able to figure out what's the next step I can do right now. And for me at the time, it was, open a book. Like I had a book, and so I was able to open it. Now read it. I suspect there's at least one listener out there who would be able to say, I have a bunch of books that I endeavor to read, but I haven't done it. So, like open it, read a page, right? That becomes a cause. And the effect may be I want to read 2 pages or 3 pages or 2 chapters, whatever it turns out to be, and that begins to snowball. It begins to build.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like it. Well, that is great stuff. I know that just feeling like knowing you can change the input and that by law,
Hmm.
it will improve the output. Like there's no way around it. Like you get better input, you're going to get better output. And I think that's very empowering. And
It,
just to think it can be from the tiniest little scale up to changing the practice of pharmacy as we know it, like any of the and everything in between. And I think that was for me very empowering to know that that's just the way the world works. You put
yeah,
in better, you get out better.
I,
So that was
absolutely.
exciting.
It should be empowering. It should be encouraging, and hopefully it also is eye-opening that you begin to start to look for what are those causes around me? What are those inputs that I can be looking at? What are some of those things that I can do differently? And also the flip side of that, you look around and you say, what are the things around me that I don't like? Right? And you can reverse engineer it. Well, how did that happen? Right? What's the cause that got us to this point? Because once you're able to, and you may not make it all the way back to the beginning, but you may be able to make it back a couple of steps, or at least one step, where you can start to make different decisions. You can start to look for different ways of doing things.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of pharmacists by nature, we want to take action. We want
Mhm.
action. We don't always take the right action, but knowing that improvement on side A, the equation is just that's just the law, and
Hmm.
it comes out better on the flip side. I know for me that was very empowering just to know you don't have to watch it happen. You can take action,
Hmm.
and and I really liked that. Um, what else do we have for today? We have anything else going on?
Yeah,
What's going
well,
on?
we call this the Leadership Lab. So I want to take just a moment and talk about how this applies to our leadership, right? The law of cause and effect happens all around us, right? I can go to the lunchroom and I can put something in the microwave, and I could set the cause is, what am I, what am I setting the timer to, right? And the effect is I'll get a warm meal, I'll get a burnt meal, whatever it turns out to be. But when it comes down to it, um, how does this apply to our leadership? And I want to give our listeners a phrase, and I would encourage you to write this down. I would encourage you to spend a little time with this phrase. And the phrase is this: it's that everything rises and falls on leadership. Everything. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Now, I give you that phrase, and I want to ask you to look at that phrase through the filter of cause and effect. In that phrase, what is the cause? What is the effect? And the cause is your leadership, and the effect is things rising or things falling, right? And if you look around you and you see things falling, and from a guy in the community pharmacy space, I see that. I see a lot of that. I mean, how many pharmacy closures are we looking at over the last several years? And what's been announced for closures, or at least forecasted closures in the coming years, that looks a lot like falling. And so I would encourage you to at least consider this uh, through this phrase: everything rises and falls on leadership. And so perhaps when you hear that, it can make you uncomfortable. I know it made me uncomfortable at first, but I think we talked about this in our last time together here, Dino, that this is not meant to be an indictment. It's meant to be an invitation. Don't look at it and say, "Oh, I'm a good leader," or "I'm a bad leader," or "I'm a terrible leader." Blah, forget that, right? When it comes down to it, we all have so much opportunity to improve. What I would encourage you to do is to look around, and if you see things aren't going in the direction that you want, that's actually an invitation for you to improve your leadership skills. And it doesn't matter where you operate within the organization. It does not matter. You can make an impact wherever you are. right? That's the beautiful thing. And when we improve our leadership skills, what are we doing? We're changing the inputs, we're changing the causes, and that's going to have an effect on everything around us. And I think that that's really a neat thing. A Another phrase that I would give you, and that I would encourage you to just keep closer to top of mind, if at all possible, is this, and it's that the variable is always the input. The variable's always the input. When you start changing that input, you can very well expect to start changing the output. When you change the cause, you can very much expect the effect to change. When you change your diet, what's the effect? You're going to see that. If you change your diet for the better, you're going to see you'll see a positive effect. If you change your diet for the worse, you're going to see a negative effect. That's the law of cause and effect in action for each one of us, no matter where we are. But when we have better inputs, what we can do is we can confidently expect better outputs. We can confidently expect better results. So when we have better causes, we're going to get better effects.
Yes. I think the word confidence in that right there is really what resonates with me. Like, because,
Mhm.
sometimes you feel like, okay, I'm not sure why they put me here, but here I am. And you find
Mhm.
yourself in this role. And the last thing that was ever on my mind at that moment where something needed to be done was confidence. And
Right.
so I think that's what I find intriguing about the laws of leadership is that they're laws, like it's gonna happen, like better here, better there, and whatever law it is. And I think the fact that you can like take those laws and really apply them as such and have confidence that the other side of this thing, if I can do this over here, it's gonna equal this. And because it just does, because that's just how it works. And
And to your earlier comment, it is so empowering, right? It's so empowering. But then going back to what we talked about last week, there's so many people that don't realize that, or their awareness of it is not. Um, it's not a very high level of awareness. Like they see it sometimes, but to keep it top of mind, to be intentional about being causative with those things around you can be so very impactful. And the benefits that it can have on your team, on your patients, on yourself, when you start practicing the law of cause and effect, everybody around you is going to benefit. It's not just at the workplace. It it's at home, right? When you become aware of how that works. And all too often folks either aren't aware, or they don't pay it high enough mind, and they get results that they don't like. And sometimes people get stuck there. So I hope to our listeners today that they leave with a little feeling a little bit encouraged, right? That, hey, there's a principle out there, and it's at your fingertips. You can do something about it right now. If you want to improve a relationship with a coworker or a patient or a family member, whatever, like, you can be causative about that right now, right now.
yes, I love it. Well, I think with that, we will start to wrap up. Do you have anything else you want to hit before we jump off
No,
of here?
well, I guess I would just say this. I firmly believe that pharmacy is the hope of healthcare. Now, and I don't know if you and I have had this conversation before, Dina, or not, but I sort of feel the obligation and the opportunity to share this with our listeners right now. Now, as I make a statement like that pharmacy is the hope of healthcare, I would also give the qualification that I hope every discipline within healthcare would say, I feel that my discipline is the hope of healthcare. I hope you're all passionate about that. But when you look at where pharmacists are, where they're positioned, how they interact with patients, we have such a privilege. We have such a privilege, and with that brings just wonderful potential to make just lasting and tremendous impact. So I want to encourage you, if you have that potential, if you have that potential to be the hope of healthcare, right? That you look for opportunities to leverage the law of cause and effect. And we're going to have some things coming up. We're not too far off on it. We'll be making more formal announcements here over the next several days. But there's going to be opportunities for you to operate on that cause end of the law of cause and effect, and we're going to give you some opportunities to improve your leadership, and would invite that you give that strong consideration at that point. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in today. We hope you found something useful from our time together, and that if nothing else, you've been inspired to start improving your input. It will improve you and everyone around you, as Jesse has mentioned. And so I hope you're excited to find a place to leverage that. You can find Jesse and myself and Sean as well over on LinkedIn. So we'd love to connect with you there. Reach out, send us a message, send us a connect. We'd love to chat with you. Also, don't forget to head over to RPH Ally and sign up there for support and resources. I've done that myself the last couple of weeks, so it's a great place to be. And then in the meantime, keep leading your teams with confidence from the boardroom to the break room, and we will see you again soon on the Leadership Lab.